Caleb Morrison had lived long enough to know that most burdens do not arrive suddenly. They settle. They arrive in small, ordinary moments, missed words, empty chairs, habits that form around absence. By the time a man realizes how heavy the weight has become, he has already learned to carry it. Morning came early on Caleb's land, the way it always did in southern Georgia. The sky lightened gradually, pale blue stretching over fields that had known his footsteps for decades. Dew clung to the grass, and the air already hinted at the heat that would settle in by noon. Caleb rose before the sun, not because he needed to, but because sleep no longer held him the way it once had. The bed felt too large now, too quiet. He dressed without turning on the light, muscle memory guiding his hands, boots, shirt, hat, the same order every morning. Routine was a form of stability. Outside, the land greeted him without judgment. Fence posts stood where he had repaired them last spring. The barn roof caught the first light, dull metal glowing softly. Somewhere in the distance, cattle shifted, waiting. Caleb breathed in slowly. The land still made sense. He moved through his chores with practiced efficiency, feeding, checking water, walking the fence line. His body knew these movements better than his mind did. Out here, there was no need to explain himself. No one asked how he was doing or whether the nights were still hard. The land only asked that he show up, and he always did. 3 years had passed since Mary's death, though some days it felt like 3 lifetimes, and others like a single unfinished conversation. The world had not stopped when she left. Caleb had learned that quickly. Bills still came, grass still grew, storms still rolled in and moved on. People assumed that meant he was doing fine. Caleb never corrected them. He had loved Mary quietly, deeply, the way men like him often do, not with grand gestures, but with consistency, with staying, with showing up every day and meaning it. They had built a life measured more in shared mornings than milestones. Now, those mornings belonged only to him. By mid-morning, the sun was higher, the heat heavier. Caleb paused near the old pecan trees, resting his hands on his hips. These trees had shaded conversations that no longer existed. Mary used to sit beneath them in the afternoons, a book in her lap, glancing up to smile when she noticed him watching. The memory came uninvited. He swallowed and looked away. Grief, he had learned, did not ask permission. Inside the house, the kitchen remained unchanged. Mary's mug still sat in the cabinet, untouched. Caleb told himself it was practical. No reason to rearrange what already worked. The truth was simpler. Moving it would make the loss real in a way he wasn't ready to face. He ate, standing up, eyes fixed out the window. Prayer used to come easily to him. Not long, formal prayers, just quiet words of gratitude, spoken without effort. Lately, those words stalled before they reached his mouth. It wasn't anger that stopped them. It was distance. Caleb still believed in God. That belief had been woven into him early, like the land itself. But belief and closeness were not the same thing. Somewhere between hospital rooms and quiet funerals, something had gone silent. He told himself that faith didn't require feeling. Still, the silence lingered. By afternoon, clouds began to gather low on the horizon. Caleb noticed them absently while repairing a loose hinge on the barn door. Storms were common this time of year. Heat invited them. The air thickened, insects growing louder, restless, a familiar pattern. Yet something about this one made him pause longer than usual. The clouds didn't rush. They waited. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow and studied the sky, a faint tension settling in his chest. He shook it off. He had learned not to dramatize small unease. Life had taught him enough lessons already. Still, as he turned back to his work, a quiet thought passed through him, unexpected and unwelcome. Some storms don't stay outside. He finished his work and headed toward the house, unaware that the land was already preparing to speak. The afternoon stretched longer than Caleb expected. Heat pressed down on the land with a quiet insistence, the kind that made even familiar spaces feel heavy. Inside the house, the air stood still despite the open windows. The ceiling fan turned slowly, clicking in a rhythm Caleb barely noticed anymore. He sat at the small wooden table, hands wrapped around a glass of water, staring at nothing in particular. This was the hour he disliked most. Morning gave him purpose. Evening gave him rest, but afternoons, especially the quiet ones, left too much room for thought. And thought, when left unattended, often wandered into places he preferred to keep closed. His eyes drifted to the doorway leading to the bedroom. Mary's bedroom, though it was still his, he hadn't changed it much. He told himself it was respect. He told himself it was love. Some days, he suspected it was fear. The bed remained neatly made, untouched except for his side. Her dresser still held the same few items she had left behind, things that felt too personal to move, yet too ordinary to explain keeping. Caleb stood slowly and crossed the room. He opened the drawer he rarely allowed himself to open. Inside lay a folded note, yellowed at the edges from being handled too often. Mary had written it years ago, tucking it away without ceremony. He had found it by accident after her death and never asked why she'd written it, or why she'd kept it. He unfolded it carefully, though he knew every word by heart. Whatever happens, it read, "Don't forget that you were never meant to carry everything alone." Caleb closed his eyes. The sentence landed differently now than it had 3 years ago. Back then, it had felt like a kindness he could not accept. Now, it felt like a truth he had been resisting. He returned the note to its place and shut the drawer. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Caleb looked toward the window. The sky had darkened more than he realized. Clouds hung low, heavy with intention. Wind stirred the trees, bending branches in slow, uneasy movements. He checked the weather radio on the counter. The static cleared just long enough for a warning to come through. Strong storms expected, high winds, possible flooding. The voice was calm, professional. Caleb nodded to himself. Preparation came naturally. Emotion did not. He moved back outside, securing what needed securing, checking on the animals. The wind picked up, tugging at his shirt, whispering through the grass. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Mary standing in the doorway during a storm, years ago, watching him work. "You always move faster when the sky looks like that," she had said, smiling. He had shrugged. "Storms don't wait." She had laughed softly. "Neither do feelings." At the time, he hadn't understood why she said it. Now, as thunder grew louder and the air charged with tension, the words returned with clarity that unsettled him. Caleb finished his rounds and stood near the edge of the pasture, scanning the property. Everything appeared in order. Still, a restlessness settled in his chest, deeper than concern for weather alone. The storm felt personal. He headed back toward the house just as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They struck the dust and grass sharply, releasing a familiar, earthy scent. Rain intensified quickly, drumming against the roof, the barn, the land itself. Lightning flashed, close enough to light the sky white. Caleb paused on the porch, rain misting his face. He wasn't afraid of the storm. What unsettled him was the way it mirrored something inside him: pressure, release, an unspoken demand for attention. For years, he had survived by staying steady, by not leaning too far into emotion. But the storm did not ask for permission. Thunder cracked louder now, rattling windows. The power flickered once, then steadied. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his heart beating a little faster than the situation required. He leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. For reasons he could not name, a sense of anticipation filled the room, not dread, not fear, but something close to expectancy, as if something long avoided was finally catching up with him. The storm outside was growing stronger, and somewhere deep within Caleb Morrison, something long held back was beginning to move. The storm did not build gradually after that. It arrived with intention. Winds struck the house hard enough to make the walls groan, a low, strained sound that carried through the rooms. Rain drove sideways now, hammering against the windows in relentless sheets. The familiar rhythms of the land were replaced by chaos. Branches snapping, loose metal clattering, the deep, rolling percussion of thunder overhead. Caleb stood in the center of the living room, listening, not watching the storm, listening to it. There was a difference. This storm spoke in a language he had not wanted to hear for years. It stripped away distraction. It demanded presence. He felt it in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the weather alone. The power flickered again, once, twice, and then went out completely. Darkness filled the house. The silence that followed was brief but unsettling, broken only by the storm's continued assault. The old clock on the wall stopped ticking, its sudden stillness louder than thunder. Caleb reached for the flashlight kept in the drawer by the door. His movements were steady, but his breathing was not. The beam cut through the dark, landing on familiar objects, chairs, walls. The framed photograph of him and Mary taken years ago at a county fair. He hesitated there. The photograph caught him off guard. Mary's smile was easy, unforced. She had been looking at him, not the camera. He remembered that moment clearly, how she had squeezed his hand and said nothing, as if words would have only diluted what already existed. A sharp crack of thunder shook the house. Caleb turned away. Outside, the wind howled louder, urgent now. He stepped onto the porch, rain immediately soaking his shirt, boots slipping slightly on the wet boards. Lightning illuminated the pasture in stark flashes, revealing movement where there shouldn't have been any. The tall pine near the back of the property swayed violently. Caleb's jaw tightened. That tree had been a concern for years. He had meant to deal with it, but like many things after Mary's death, it had been postponed, not ignored, just delayed. Life had felt heavy enough already. Now the delay had found him. Another gust of wind bent the pine further, its trunk groaning under the strain. The direction of its lean was unmistakable, straight toward the old shed where the animals had taken shelter. Caleb didn't think. He moved. Rain lashed his face as he ran, boots sinking into mud with every step. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, barely useful. Wind pushed against him with force that demanded effort, not caution. He reached the shed, shouting to the animals, urging them forward. His voice sounded strange in the storm, smaller than he expected, but determined. One by one, they moved, hesitant but responsive. Lightning struck nearby. The ground trembled. Caleb's heart pounded, not from exertion alone. There was something else now, an urgency that went beyond responsibility, a sense that this moment carried weight, that it mattered in ways he could not articulate. The pine groaned again, this time deeper. Caleb looked up. The trunk split with a sharp, violent crack. Time slowed. He saw the tree beginning to fall. He felt the instinct to run, to protect himself. But another instinct rose stronger, older, rooted in stewardship, in care, in a lifetime of choosing responsibility over comfort. He pushed one last animal clear of the doorway and lunged forward. The tree came down behind him with a force that stole the breath from his lungs. The impact sent debris flying. Caleb lost his footing, hitting the ground hard. Pain flared through his side, sharp and immediate. For a moment, the world narrowed. Rain poured over him. Wind roared. His chest felt tight, air refusing to come easily. He lay there, stunned, face pressed into the mud, the storm raging without mercy. And then something broke. Not his body, his resolve. The weight he had carried for years, quiet, disciplined, unacknowledged, rose all at once. Grief surged with a force he could no longer manage. Mary's absence, his silence, the unanswered questions he had buried under responsibility, all of it pressed down on him at once. Caleb pushed himself onto his knees, breath ragged. He didn't plan to pray. The words escaped him raw and unshaped. "God," he said aloud, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I can't do this alone anymore." The sentence hung there, fragile and exposed. Thunder rolled overhead, but something shifted, not immediately, not dramatically. The rain softened just enough to notice. The wind eased, not stopping, but losing its fury. Caleb stayed where he was, mud-soaked, shaking, not from cold, but from the release of something long held back. For the first time since Mary's death, he did not feel like he was speaking into emptiness. He felt heard. Caleb remained on his knees long after the words left his mouth. Mud soaked into his jeans, rain clung to his skin, no longer violent but steady, almost gentle by comparison. His breathing slowly found a rhythm again, each inhale less strained than the last. Around him, the storm began to loosen its grip. It didn't end all at once. It didn't retreat with drama. It simply softened. Thunder moved farther away. The wind lost its sharp edge. The rain changed from an assault into something closer to cleansing. Caleb noticed the change with quiet disbelief. He lifted his head and scanned the area. Flashlight still clutched tightly in his hand. The fallen pine lay across the ground behind him, massive and splintered, its reach stopping just short of the shed. The distance between destruction and safety was narrow, so narrow it unsettled him, too precise to be coincidence. He stood slowly, his side aching, and walked toward the shed. Inside, the animals were shaken, but unharmed. Their restless movements calmed as he approached, his presence familiar, grounding. Caleb rested his forehead briefly against the wooden beam of the doorway. "Thank you," he whispered, not loudly, not ceremonially, just honestly. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. At the same moment, a low hum reached his ears, the unmistakable sound of power returning. Lights in the house across the pasture glowed faintly, then brightened. Light. Actual light. Caleb straightened, heart beating faster now, not from fear, but from something close to awe. He turned slowly, taking in the scene around him. The storm clouds were thinning, edges torn open to reveal a sky in transition. The worst had passed. He walked back toward the house carefully, each step deliberate. Pain reminded him he was still human, still vulnerable, but something else walked with him now, a quiet assurance that had been missing for years. Inside, the house felt different. Not because the furniture had moved or the walls had changed, because he had. The clock on the wall began ticking again, steady, measured, alive. Caleb sat down heavily in his chair, exhausted. Rain continued to fall outside, lighter now, rhythmic. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the full weight of the moment. Images of Mary surfaced, not sharp, not painful, just present. Her smile, her patience, the way she had trusted that God's presence didn't require noise. For the first time, Caleb understood. Faith wasn't the absence of storms. It was the presence that remained when the storm no longer ruled. He didn't expect answers that night. He didn't ask for explanations. What he felt instead was clarity, a gentle understanding that grief had not been a failure of faith, and silence had not meant abandonment. He had been carrying more than he was meant to, and God had waited, not with impatience, but with patience for him to finally admit it. Outside, the rain slowed further. Stars began to appear, one by one, faint but steady. Caleb watched them through the window, his chest easing with each breath. For the first time since Mary's death, the night did not feel empty, it felt held. Morning arrived gently, not with urgency, not with demand, but with the kind of calm that follows a night where something important has settled into place. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, touching the land with a softness Caleb had not noticed in a long time. He woke in his chair, stiff and sore, a blanket draped over him without any memory of when he had pulled it there. For a moment, he simply sat still, listening. No wind, no thunder, just the ordinary sounds of a new day. Caleb stood slowly, testing his balance. His side protested, but the pain felt honest, earned, a reminder of effort, not loss. He walked to the window and looked out over the pasture. The fallen pine lay where it had come to rest, no longer a threat, just wood and weight and evidence of the night before, evidence of protection. He stepped onto the porch, breathing in air washed clean by rain. The land smelled renewed. Birds moved cautiously at first, then more boldly, as if reassured that the danger had passed. Caleb rested his hands on the railing. For years, he had believed strength meant endurance without complaint, that leadership meant silence, that faith meant pressing forward even when nothing seemed to answer back. The storm had undone those assumptions, not harshly, but truthfully. It had shown him that surrender was not weakness, that asking for help did not diminish responsibility, that God's presence was not measured by noise, but by faithfulness. He thought of Mary again, not with ache, with gratitude. He understood now that loving her had shaped him, not broken him, that her absence had left space, not a void, but a place where something deeper could grow if he allowed it. Later that day, Caleb worked slowly. He checked the animals, cleared debris, assessed what needed repair. There was no rush. The land was patient. And for the first time in years, so was he. As he worked, he spoke quietly, not to fill silence, but to inhabit it. Words of thanks, words of acknowledgement, words that didn't ask for anything. The sky remained clear, light stretching long across the fields. Caleb paused near the fallen tree, placing his hand on its rough surface. It had stood for decades. It had fallen in the right direction. So had he. That evening, Caleb returned to the porch as another set of clouds drifted lazily across the horizon. Not a storm, just movement. He sat down, the chair creaking beneath him, and allowed himself to rest. The storm had not erased his grief. It had given it context. Loss would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined the ending. Purpose remained. Stewardship remained. Faith, quiet, grounded, resilient, remained. And so did light. As the first stars appeared, Caleb bowed his head briefly, not out of habit, out of peace. Some storms arrive to test a man. Others arrive to teach him that he was never meant to stand alone. And when God used the storm to show Caleb Morrison the light, it was not the storm that changed him. It was what finally broke open when the storm passed. Time moved forward, as it always did. Not quickly, not loudly, just faithfully. Weeks passed after the storm, then months. The land healed in small, honest ways. Grass grew back where mud had scarred the ground. The fallen pine was cut and stacked, its wood repurposed for warmth rather than wasted. Caleb worked steadily, but no longer with the tight urgency that once drove him. He worked with attention. There was a difference he could feel in his body, in the way he paused now before decisions, in the way he allowed rest without guilt. Leadership, he was learning, was not proven by exhaustion. One afternoon, Caleb drove into town for supplies. At the hardware store, a man he had known for years asked how he was doing. It was a casual question, asked without expectation. Caleb considered the answer. "I'm steady," he said finally. And he meant it. That evening, he opened the bedroom drawer again. This time, when he touched Mary's note, his hand did not hesitate. He read it once more, then placed it somewhere new, inside the Bible that sat on the shelf, not as a relic, but as a companion. He didn't need to cling to the past anymore. He could carry it forward. On certain nights, Storms still rolled across the countryside, thunder still echoed, rain still fell hard against the roof, but Caleb no longer felt the need to brace himself against them. He watched, he listened, he remembered, and sometimes, quietly, he smiled. Grief had not left him, but it no longer ruled him. It had become something else, a teacher, a witness, a reminder of love that had mattered enough to hurt. Faith, too, had changed. It was no longer something he tried to perform correctly. It was something he lived into, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. He spoke to God the way he spoke to the land now, with respect, with trust, without needing constant reassurance. One morning, standing beneath the pecan trees, Caleb felt a familiar breeze move through the branches. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, not to escape, but to acknowledge. Somewhere along the way, the storm had done what nothing else could. It had reminded him that light does not always arrive as answers. Sometimes it arrives as permission. Permission to rest, permission to feel, permission to keep going without carrying everything alone. And that, Caleb knew now, was miracle enough. Autumn arrived without asking permission. The air cooled gradually, mornings carrying a softness that made breath visible just long enough to notice. Leaves along the pasture edges shifted from green to muted gold, falling one by one as if the land itself were learning how to let go without resistance. Caleb welcomed the change. He found that he no longer measured time by what had been lost, but by what was being entrusted to him now. The land responded to that shift. Or perhaps he was finally paying attention to the way it always had. One afternoon, a truck pulled into the drive, dust rising, tires crunching over gravel. Caleb watched from the porch, curiosity stirring rather than concern. His son stepped out. They hadn't argued. They hadn't drifted apart in anger. They had simply grown quiet with each other after Mary's death, both unsure how to step into a shared grief without reopening wounds. The visit was unannounced. That mattered. They talked slowly at first, about practical things, about the storm months earlier, about work, but silence no longer felt threatening. It felt spacious, room enough for honesty to arrive on its own time. Later, they walked the property together. Caleb pointed out the place where the pine had fallen. He spoke of the night calmly, without drama, without restraint. His son listened, not as a child, but as a man learning how strength could look different than he had been taught. As the sun dipped lower, they sat beneath the pecan trees. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb said quietly, "I didn't know how to let you see me hurting." His son nodded. "I didn't know how to ask." That was enough. The land held their words without judgment. When the truck finally drove away that evening, Caleb felt no ache in his chest, just a quiet gratitude for timing, for patience, for the way healing often arrived indirectly. That night, a breeze moved through the open window. Caleb lay in bed, his bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house. He placed one hand on the mattress beside him, not in longing, but in remembrance. He whispered a prayer of thanks. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. Leadership he was learning extended beyond land and labor. It lived in presence, in consistency, in the courage to remain open after loss. The storms would come again. He knew that. But so would the light, and now he knew how to see it. Winter approached without urgency. It came the way wisdom often does, not announcing itself, not demanding attention, but settling in once resistance had finally loosened. The mornings grew colder. Frost traced the edges of the fields, delicate and temporary. Caleb adjusted his routines, not begrudgingly, but attentively. He had learned to listen. The land required less explanation now, fewer internal negotiations. He no longer pushed himself to prove endurance. If a task could wait, it waited. If rest was needed, it was taken. This was not laziness, it was discernment. Caleb noticed the change most clearly in the evenings. He no longer filled the hours with noise, no radio left on for company, no television murmuring in the background. Silence had lost its threat. It had become something else entirely. A place to stand. One evening, while sorting through old tools in the shed, Caleb found Mary's gardening gloves tucked into a crate. He held them for a moment, feeling the worn leather, the imprint of her hands still faintly present. He did not rush to put them away. He did not cling to them either. He placed them carefully on a shelf where they could be seen, not as a wound, but as a witness. Grief had matured. It had stopped asking why and begun asking how. How do I live faithfully with what remains? How do I steward what has been entrusted, even after loss? How do I remain open without being unguarded? These were quieter questions, better ones. Caleb found himself offering guidance more often now. Small, unremarkable moments. A neighbor asking about fencing. A younger man asking about land he had inherited but did not yet understand. Caleb did not lecture. He simply shared what had been learned the hard way. "Don't rush what's meant to teach you," he told one of them. "Strength doesn't come from holding everything tight," he told another. He recognized the irony only faintly. One Sunday morning, Caleb sat alone on the porch as sunlight warmed the wood beneath him. He closed his eyes, not to escape the world, but to enter it more fully. His prayer was brief, unstructured. "Thank you for staying." No explanation followed. None was needed. The storm that had once shaken his world no longer defined him. It had become part of a larger story, one of alignment, patience, and quiet courage. He was no longer moving forward out of obligation alone. He was moving forward with intention. Caleb Morrison had not been given his old life back. He had been given something better, clarity, and with it, the steady confidence that even when storms returned, as they always do, he would recognize the light when it appeared. Not because it was loud, but because he had learned how to see. Some storms don't arrive to destroy what you built. They arrive to show you what you've been carrying alone for too long. If part of Caleb's journey felt familiar, it's because many strong, responsible people live quietly burdened, doing what must be done, holding everything together, rarely stopping to ask who is holding them. This story wasn't about a man who lost his way. It was about a man who stayed standing long enough to finally listen. And maybe that's where you are right now, still showing up, still carrying weight, still faithful, just tired. If this moment brought you calm, clarity, or a quiet sense of direction, there is more waiting for you here. These stories are created for people who don't need noise. They need meaning. Subscribe to the channel, not out of habit, but intention, so these moments of reflection can keep finding you when you need them most. And when this video ends, stay with us. The next story on your screen continues this path. Another quiet journey, another moment of insight, another reminder that you are not walking alone. Let it play.